Hello everyone, welcome to the JCast Network. I'm your host, Aaron Herman. We had the opportunity to speak with Dr. David Ellenson and Dr. Daniel Gordis about their book on conversion at the Skirball Center for Adult Jewish Learning in New York City. Let's take a closer look.
Book in particular, we deal with an Orthodox community that certainly in the diaspora deals principally, though not exclusively, with people who are parts of, in quotes, thick Jewish cultures. That is to say, persons who engage quite actively in classical study of Torah, but also classical Jewish observance. Of course, the challenge is that many poskim, many rabbis who make decisions in regard to conversion are also dealing with people where, in fact, you have a social reality where numbers of people perhaps don't share these practices or classical beliefs. The question in some measure is that a rabbi, whether in an Orthodox community or a non-Orthodox community, has to make a judgment about how best to both be faithful to the tradition on the one hand and be inclusive and bring Jews in on the other.
I think one of the things that comes out of the book for contemporary Jews is to try to see the struggle that these rabbis were in between, on one hand, as Rabbi Ellenson said, the sociological realities, and on the other hand, an attempt to try to bring people into the fold while maintaining the traditions and the standards of Judaism. So if we were talking about bringing some kind of dialogue about conversion to communities today, I would want people to understand what it is that we point to in the book, that there's a tension between the reality of where people are in real life on the one hand, but the demands and the strictures of Jewish tradition on the other. And I would hope that wherever they fall, whether they're Orthodox, Conservative, Reconstructionist, Reform, some other definition of Jewishness, that they understand that there is an inherent tension between wanting on one level to be inclusive and bring somebody in, but at the same time recognizing that you're bringing them into something, and that something has certain standards.
And whenever you start thinking about a book, you have a vision. I never wrote a book before, but I started with only one page. but as you're writing your book, did anything surprise you, or did anything was that moment where you're like, we need to divert from this or go further into a certain subject?
I think the overarching trajectory of the book, direction of the book, remained much the same. On the other hand, what we did begin to discover was that there was more and more material and frankly more and more nuance than I think we imagined at the very beginning. And it actually became an interesting adventure to look at the plethora of materials, but also to understand the importance that different contexts played. I think in some ways the most challenging chapter was a chapter on Israel, because there the rabbis who made their decisions were actually making it for a living society where the rabbis issuing the rulings actually possessed legal authority to, in effect, grant or deny citizenship to people. And in some ways that was different than in the diasporan setting in Europe, North America, where Judaism has a much more voluntaristic dimension.
I think the first thing that surprised us was that we finished. It took us some 20 years to write the book, so that was an interesting surprise. Done. That's interesting. And the other thing that I think David and I would both acknowledge was surprising is that we spent, obviously not all 20 years, but we spent chunks of time over 20 years talking about this without ever actually talking about what each of us felt about what conversion policy should be in the real life world. And it's interesting that you can get so buried in studying these ancient texts and more recent texts, but thinking about these Orthodox poskim in their own context, that two people who share a lot about the Jewish world but don't agree about everything actually could spend so many hours together thinking about conversion and never actually saying, but I think and you think and so on and so forth. And I think it's only actually after the book has come out that we've become alerted to the fact that we never discussed it, and now we're starting to.
And it's not completely surprising that given Rabbi Gordis's approach to Judaism and my own approach, I think there are significant overlaps, that my definition of where boundaries might be and the desire to be inclusive is probably more lax, lenient, broader than perhaps his is. But on the other hand, I do think we're working in the same dialectic.
And obviously you can never gauge exactly how your readers are going to feel after they read the book, but what's your hope? What's something that you want them to take away?
Well, we certainly want them to say that these are the two most brilliant and insightful authors that they've ever read on any subject. But beyond that, what I would like them to take away is two different kinds of things. On the scholarly level, to understand that what postgame, what Jewish legal arbiters are doing is more than answering legal questions, but they're actually crafting policy for Jewish communities facing unprecedented challenge and trying to navigate uncharted waters and trying to figure, what do you do if you're in Germany and the reform movement offers you options outside orthodoxy that didn't exist 25 years earlier? What do you do if you're in any part of Western Europe, the United States, where there are options of intermarriage or civil marriage that didn't used to exist? So I want these people to see that they're doing more than simply answering legal questions. They're trying to help a community find its way really in the dark. And the other thing that I'd like them to see is that you have a Reform rabbi and a conservative rabbi talking about Orthodox rabbis and their views on conversion. That's a kind of a trans-denominational or all-inclusive sort of conversation that I personally think is far too lacking in the Jewish world today, both in America where David lives and works, and in Israel where I live and work. And if that can somehow be a model to people, that people outside the Orthodox community can take Orthodox texts seriously, and perhaps one day people in the Orthodox community would take as well non-Orthodox texts seriously, that I think would be a huge step forward for the Jewish community, and I think we both feel gratified if that happened.
Yeah, I think Danny put it really quite well. If that were to happen, I would be elated. I do think that one of the issues that you would see is that Judaism really is an ongoing kind of tradition, and that individuals really are engaged in active conversation with the tradition, and that each generation has an obligation to both be faithful to the tradition and take the values and principles inherent in it and apply them to the challenges of a contemporaneous era. Quite clearly, one other thing I believe I would like people to take from the book, and I think it's implied in what Rabbi Gordis just said, is that individuals would come to understand that while it is that true that we have looked at exclusively Orthodox rabbinical writings, that the dialectic you see here between the need to preserve Judaism and at the same time have it adapt, be nimble, be flexible in terms of constructing policy in the modern world is not confined to the Orthodox alone, that in fact the process or procedure that we point to in the book in terms of the policy making that these rabbis put forth is frankly one in which denominational leaders of all stripes who treat the tradition with integrity, it's a process in which all of us engage.
As you can see, Dr. David Ellenson and Dr. Daniel Gordis' new book brings new insight into the conversion process and what it means in our modern Jewish times. This is Aaron Herman, and thanks for watching.